Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to No Menthol Sunday. Today is May the 21st, 2023, and it is a national day of recognition of No Menthol Sunday. So across the nation, there are individuals talking about this topic, and I'm glad that you have joined us today. And we're inviting you to be a part of the conversation. So even as we share, I invite you to put your questions in the chat box. And if you want to speak, feel free to just raise your hand and we will bring you in to share your question. Okay, we look forward to it. And I am Pastor Rhonda, your host for today. I am the founder of Celebrate Life Cancer Ministry, and I'm just happy to be present today. And many of you know what that means for me. Just happy to be present. So let me turn it over to Dr. Karen Beard, and she'll tell you a little bit about herself and whatever else you'd like to do right now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Karen Beard, and I am a certified tobacco treatment specialist with Amplify. Amplify is the African American statewide coordinating center. We are located in San Francisco, but we cover the entire state. And so some of the things that we do is we provide technical assistance to community organizations around the issues of tobacco control and tobacco cessation. We also provide free virtual tobacco cessation classes, stop smoking classes. And we also do work in tobacco control. I don't know if you heard about the FDA moving to take menthol products off of the market, but that movement is partly due to AATCLC, which is the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. We sued along with the AMA and other organizations to make the FDA take the products off the market. And so we're real happy about that. Let's see what else can I say. I'm also the project leader for a cessation capacity building project in South LA. It's called Breaking Free from Nicotine in South LA. And what we're doing there is we're training 10 community-based organizations how to deliver culturally appropriate tobacco cessation services. And so today I'm so happy to see all of you here in observance of No Menthol Sunday. No Menthol Sunday started back in 2014. And at that time, we just wanted to raise awareness around menthol and start the conversation. But the tobacco industry, being who they are, were targeting our people. They were using predatory marketing tactics like lowering the price of cigarettes by giving us African Americans coupons. And so we decided we had to take a stronger stance against the tobacco industry. So No Menthol Sunday is an observance that started in the faith-based community. Each year there's a theme and a scripture. And but we also now have, and around the country, some people are now, it's not No Menthol Sunday, it's No Menthol Week, No Menthol Month, No Menthol period. And so I'm just glad to see that we're moving in that direction. And with that, Pastor Rhonda, I'll give it back to you.
So thank you so much and welcome. And thank you for sharing with us today. So, and then we have Dr. Shashandra Reynolds, and have at it.
Hi, thank you, Pastor Rhonda, for the opportunity to be here today. And thanks, Dr. Beard, for the opportunity to share this discussion with you. I'm a thoracic surgeon at UCLA. What that means is I basically operate from the neck down to the abdomen. A lot of my patients do have lung cancer. And so as a surgeon at UCLA, I provide services at our two main hospitals. In addition to that, I work at Harbor UCLA and Olive View UCLA. So providing care in South Los Angeles and farther north in the Valley. Most of the care that I provide does involve lung cancer care. I work closely with oncologists, radiation oncologists, to make sure patients get to all of the appropriate steps to work towards a cure in regards to lung cancer. In addition to the surgery that I do, I'm also a researcher, and my research is based on how we can directly target the fact that African Americans have the highest incidence of lung cancer in our country. And in addition to that, we unfortunately have the highest mortality rate. And from cessation to keeping menthol cigarettes out of the hands of our children, to making sure that we have access to the appropriate treatments, in addition to life-saving screenings. Those are all things that I focus my research on.
Awesome, awesome. So I'm going to start with what struck me, Dr. Beard, when you said targeted. They targeted the cigarette industry targeted African Americans. I don't know where you're going to begin this conversation, but if you can make sure you address that, that would help me a lot.
Okay, and you know, the tobacco industry is very smooth. They're very good at what they do. And so when I say that they targeted, going back to the 50s, I think in 1951, they started to do research on African Americans. They wanted to find out, you know, the things that we enjoy, that we would support. For instance, the Jazz Cool Festival. I don't know if any of you have ever gone to like the Jazz Cool Festival. Well, I thought cool meant, you know, I'm cool, but cool meant cool cigarettes. And I didn't even make the connection that when they were passing out free cigarettes, that's what they were doing, you know, giving us free cigarettes. So, because once you start smoking, you know, you get hooked. And so they targeted us in that way. They also targeted us in as I said before, to lower the price of the cigarettes, they would give coupons so that you could afford to purchase the product. And you know, my personal opinion is that they have hijacked our culture. They have made us believe that in order for us to be happy, you know, to be important, you know, we have to smoke. And, you know, even I fell prey to that whole image of having a cigarette because, you know, we saw it in the movies at that time. You know, we saw it on TV. And I can tell you that I started smoking when I was around 21. And I'm ashamed to say it today, and don't judge me, but I started smoking because my girlfriend, I had just graduated from college. My girlfriend told me, if you want to meet, you know, a boyfriend, what we're going to do, we're going to go to a club. Virginia Slims had just come out. So we bought a pack of Virginia Slims. We went to the club and she said, now we're going to hold the cigarette, but we're not going to light it. And a guy would come over and light your cigarette, you know, like Lauren Bacall and so I liked that long look. I thought it was so chic, but thank God I didn't get hooked on it because I'm cheap. I did not want to pay 75 cents for a pack of cigarettes. And so back in the 70s, that was a gallon of gas. So I was able to quit. So they have a number of ways of targeting us. For instance, they use our heroes, the people that we look up to. They used our magazines to, you know, have ads like Jet and Ebony, you know, and our political figures to, you know, gain our confidence and our trust. And they're relentless. We just passed Proposition 31 to take menthol products off the market in California. And I think it was like a week later, they were out with a non-menthol menthol cigarette. Now go figure. So now the state of California has given them until the end of June to say why this new non-menthol menthol cigarette is not flavored, because that's how they're trying to skirt the law. So they're very cagey. African Americans are not the only group that they target. They put profit over people, and they're bullies. And the reason I say they're bullies is because they pick on people who are vulnerable, the less educated, priority population. So that's how they target us.
Very good. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that portion, Dr. Rebels?
Just to basically completely agree with Dr. Beard was saying, approximately 80% of the African American community that smokes menthol cigarettes. And so it is definitely a huge problem in our population. And, just to echo the fact again that lung cancer kills, unfortunately, about 250 people a day. And African Americans have the highest incidence. In addition to that, we're more likely to develop lung cancer with fewer cigarettes compared to white people. We develop lung cancer at much younger ages in addition to that. And unfortunately, a lot of these excess deaths, sickness, costs is associated with menthol cigarette smoking in our community.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons for, I believe, that excess deaths is because menthol in cigarettes gives you a very cooling sensation, like in your throat, your mouth. And so you will take a deeper inhale. You may hold the smoke in your mouth longer, and then blow it out of your nose. So, menthol makes it easy to start, but more difficult to quit cigarettes. So I believe we have to show people compassion, if they don't quit right away, because the combination of nicotine, menthol, and if they also drink coffee with a cigarette, now you got caffeine. So you have nicotine, caffeine, and menthol that the body has to adjust to being without, when they try to give it up. And so it's not easy. I realize that. And so that's why I do the work that I do. I did this work even when I didn't get, paid to do it, because I'm a tobacco widow. Because my husband died as a result of being a smoker. And I have a background in psychology, and I did everything. I thought I did the right things to help him quit, but I learned that I did all the wrong things. And that bothered me. I carried guilt for a while around that. Why couldn't I help him? And what I discovered is that although I know psychology, I didn't know nicotine. And the grips that it has, on a person. And so I've learned to show more compassion when supporting someone to give up the product. And I forgot to mention that we did a 2-year study in LA County that was called Regulating Menthol Cigarettes, African Americans' Attitudes Toward a Flavor Ban. And some of the findings from that study at first was, very disconcerting. But as we talked about, my team and I, we have a different opinion of maybe why. But just to share with you some of the things that came out of that study is that over half of the African Americans in that particular study didn't feel like they were targeted by the tobacco industry. Over half said if we took menthol cigarettes off the market, they would switch to another brand instead of quitting. Some of the participants didn't understand why menthol was not good for you, because we have menthol in like a vapor rub, we have it in cough drops, and so they don't see the difference. And I mentioned that because we had the community, we have some work to do around educating people who smoke, about menthol in particular, and smoking in general. Some of the politicians, I won't call any names, have made statements that when we take these products off the market, we are taking away their rights. They have a right to smoke. And I don't understand it, why you would tell a person that, especially, Dr. Revels, the misery, and a lot of people focus on the death, you die. But I see a lot of people that are living with tobacco related disabilities. At the end of my husband's life, he was on oxygen 24/7. He couldn't walk and talk at the same time. He couldn't eat and talk at the same time because he had had half of one lung removed, a third of the other. And he continued to smoke. Even after having cancer 2 times, he continued to smoke. And, I said, well, I know he's intelligent because he married me, but I couldn't understand why he, continued to smoke. And it was the 3rd surgery where he just didn't have enough lung capacity. And so, he really suffered. He really suffered during the end of his life. And, a lot of people don't see that part. We talk about the death, but there's a lot of disability with that too.
I'm sorry that you and your family had to go through that. You mentioned something extremely important, and it is, in fact, the disability. It's not just lung cancer that people can suffer from in regards to tobacco use, but it can worsen diabetes. It can cause severe heart disease. It can cause chronic lung disease where people subsequently require oxygen and don't have enough lung capacity. It can cause disease in your vascular system where people have had to have amputations. And then in addition to that, it's not just lung cancer. People develop esophageal cancer and a lot of other very difficult things, unfortunately. And that disability is something that patients have to live with every single day, in addition to their family members, at a considerable cost.
So you mentioned earlier that you did some things that maybe you should not have done. What are some of those things? How can we encourage a person?
Well, the things I did out of frustration and fear and anger, I guess I would say, is that I threatened, if you don't stop smoking, I'm going to leave you. I had a lot of fear around that because I had gone through 2 surgeries, and until you have sat in a surgical waiting room and you don't know if they're going to come out, and then there's a long recovery. I didn't sleep well because he was on oxygen, and I was afraid if, we lived in Florida where we have hurricanes and your power can go out. And so I was afraid that if the oxygen machine malfunctioned and I didn't hear it, he would go into crazy. So, I did the wifey things. I cussed, I fussed, I threatened, and, I was angry. So in hindsight, if I had to do it over again, as I said before, I'd just be more compassionate. And so that's what people, especially adults, from a psychological standpoint, adults don't like to be told what to do. And so rather than telling him, you need to quit smoking, I wish that I had asked more questions. Like, what is it about smoking that you enjoy? Or how can I help you? Um, but again, I had lived with that fear of him. So I was just a crazy woman, and I wasn't able to support him the way I support people now.
But so many of us simply don't know what to do. We want to help, we want them healthy, we want them better, but we really don't know what to do. And many of us have fallen into that same category of threat because that's how we were raised. We were raised to just stop that, don't do that, leave that alone, the whole 9 yards. However, I agree with you that loving them to a point
Mhm,
of getting them to change. And sometimes it's tough love,
mhm.
so but it has to be, the word of God even tells us to do all things in love, in the
Right.
spirit of love. So if we can continue to keep that focus,
Mhm.
I believe that we can begin to encourage people to lean to the right side of things and not get left off.
Right. Just ask more questions, be go in from a standpoint of wanting to learn. Stephen Covey's fifth principle says, seek first to understand and then to be understood. And I think if I had asked more questions or even related to him during his attempts to quit, like I did my clients, but again, I did the wifey thing. One of the things that I learned uh, after he passed November 25th, 2013. I became a certified tobacco treatment specialist in 2014. And I learned he used to eat a lot of candy. And I used to say, you need to stop eating all that candy. I don't want a fat man. Da, 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 da. It's not good for you. But what I learned was that he was attempting to quit, but he probably didn't tell me because he didn't want me to shame him if he didn't succeed. And he had developed a sugar addiction because the tobacco and the papers that cigarettes are wrapped in are cured in sugar, to make it more palatable. So he had picked up a sugar addiction. So when he was trying to quit, he still craved for the sugar. So the grandkids loved it because he always had candy in his nightstand, you know. Um, so it's a very complicated chronic relapsing condition. And we need to treat people who smoke the same way we treat people, with diabetes, in terms of, being compassionate and taking a different stance with them when they fail to quit.
There used to be a campaign out that said, just say no to drugs. And I hated that campaign. While I agreed with the message, the foundation of why they were saying that, my problem with it is they never said what to say yes to. Because
Right.
when you stop doing something, you've got to replace it with something better
And leave a
than
void.
and healthier, and maybe
Mhm.
not the ultimate healthy, but you've got to
Mhm.
replace it with something that will keep you on a path of continuing to say no to that thing.
Mhm.
And now
Mhm.
you can't say no to drugs and say yes to cigarettes, but you've got to say no to menthol and
Mhm.
then say yes to what? And of course your husband was saying candy, but not understanding the whole process of what was going on there.
Mhm.
And I think that might be even one of the purposes of our meeting today, because so many of us don't know the various types of screenings that can take place. Even if you're not, well, you have to be a smoker, unfortunately. But I'll let Dr. Rebels talk about that because I have my issues with that. Because how can we get a baseline if if I get lung cancer as a secondhand smoker, or receiving secondhand smoke?
Mhm.
So there's so much in this conversation. Dr. Rebels?
Right. I before I address the screening, I did just want to mention something that Pastor Rhonda and Dr. Beard mentioned, just nicotine in general, and the fact that, you do have physical and psychological changes that happen in your body as a result of the nicotine. So it's not as easy as just say no for a lot of people. And in the context of menthol, it actually improves nicotine's ability to create an addiction in specific parts of your brain. And, so recognizing that compassion and love and trying to identify how to help people through this process. And it's important that we not just tell them to no, but what can we do to get them to effectively stop? And what do they need to say yes to? And among people who, and screening, we know something that is extremely important. Unfortunately, currently screening is only available to people who have had a smoking history. But basically, there is a large, important trial performed in the early 2000s that showed that if people between the ages of 55 and 74 were heavy smokers, if they received a CT scan every single year, it was more likely that if they did have a lung cancer, the lung cancer would be identified when it was early stage and still curable. Since that time, we've recognized that in that study where they identified that screening can save lives, only 4% of the patients were actually Black. And so what we did realize since that time is that Black people are more likely to get lung cancer, smoking significantly fewer cigarettes at a younger age. So now if you're 50 to 80 with a history of heavy smoking, you are eligible for screening. And we do know that screening saves lives. In addition to that, African American and Hispanic patients actually benefit even more from lung cancer screening in terms of the percentage of people who were diagnosed early and were able to survive and beat lung cancer. The numbers were the highest among the Black patients and the Hispanic patients. And so considering that we have the most to lose because of cigarette smoking, our higher incidence of lung cancer, but with screening, we have the most to gain. It's just very important that we can effectively let people know that screening is available. At this point, all insurances are covering screening if you do fit the criteria. Going back to what you said, Pastor Rhonda, in addition to just smoking, there are other things that are risk factors, including secondhand smoke. In addition to that, we are more likely to have environmental situations, whether it's where we live or where we work, where in the combination with cigarette smoking even increases our risk of developing lung cancer even more. But unfortunately, we're still working on it. The current criteria for screening, you do have to be a heavy smoker and older than 50. If you have quit smoking, or if you know someone that has stopped smoking, it does significantly decrease their risk of developing lung cancer. But even if you stop smoking for 15 years, all the way out to 20 years, you should get screening done. So it's just important to talk to your primary care doctors about the availability and whether you fit that criteria, because we know it does save lives, and we are able to use curable treatments to help people beat lung cancer and survive through it.
I encourage my participants in my cessation classes to ask for a spirometer exam, lung capacity, especially if they're choosing not to stop now, at least monitor the health of your lungs. And in addition to secondhand smoke, there's thirdhand smoke that you could be exposed to. And we're trying to address that issue by in multi-unit housing, whether it's public housing, condo, or whatever, you are not allowed, you shouldn't be smoking because that smoke travels through the ventilation It'll get into the carpet, the drapes and things like that. And so it's, second and third hand smoke. And another perspective I'd like to share, especially if you're a non-smoker, I wish more non-smokers would be interested in this issue. Some of them that I talk to just feel like, well, I don't smoke. I don't know anybody who does smoke, that kind of thing. And that's probably true. And I'm happy to hear that. But to Dr. Rebel's point, it's environmental also, because when people smoke and they throw that butt down on the ground, it's made out of cellulose. It can take up to 20 years to naturally dissolve. And if you live in a community where it collects, and whatever reason you walk by it or you're exposed to it, that's third hand smoke. And then from a civic engagement standpoint, it affects our community, because people with emphysema, COPD, cancer, they can't stand in lines and vote, or they are so consumed with taking care of their daily needs, managing their chronic condition, they don't think about, civic issues, and that affects our community. And so I would love to see non-smokers care more, or be interested. I'm not going to say non-smokers don't care, but be interested in what can I do? How can I move the needle on this issue?
So when I think about smoking, and I know it's a no menthol Sunday, but what about vaping? What about hookah? I think I'm saying that correctly. To me, anything that we're almost inhaling into our lungs can potentially destroy it. I just don't know how that equates with the menthol.
Well, unfortunately, many people in general, and African Americans in particular, believe that vaping is a safer way to either quit smoking or to instead of combustible products like cigarettes, I'll use vaping. And it's correct that when you vape, you're not being exposed to the chemicals. Cigarettes have up to 10,000 chemicals in them. In it. And so when you light a cigarette, those chemicals then turn into tar and, affects the lungs and those kinds of things. But my thoughts are, you shouldn't be introducing heat into your lungs, whether it's from a combustible product, whether it's aerosol, from the vaping or whatever, because heat, and Dr. Rebels can speak to this, can cause inflammation, and inflammation is what causes the chronic diseases. So, and today we don't know what's in the vape, because vapes are not, they're just now becoming regulated like cigarettes. And so when you vape, you don't know what you're getting. But it's not a panacea. It's not a alternative for smoking cigarettes, although some people believe that.
I think that's an excellent point. I think initially when vaping became extremely popular, the thought was this was a vehicle to help people with an addiction. So they would stop smoking cigarettes and wouldn't have some of those combustible chemicals inhaled into their lungs that result in all of the issues associated with not just lungs, but blood vessels, your heart. But unfortunately, with vaping, you can consume significant amounts of nicotine in a cartridge, or a few cartridges, that would be difficult for you to consume in the same period of time just with cigarettes. So we end up in a situation where someone has moved from a nicotine-based addiction to a new nicotine-based addiction. And you may not be inhaling the same carcinogens or things that are going to affect the rest of your organs and cigarettes. However, we know that we are seeing people developing severe inflammatory lung issues associated with vaping. And unfortunately, we are seeing people come in with these inflammatory and scarring lung conditions at relatively young ages, 20s and 30s. You know, there are people in their early 20s on oxygen that have developed permanent scarring related to inhaling some of the chemicals associated, some of the chemicals from vaping. And I think we haven't had enough time to identify how these things are going to affect people's lungs long term right now. But hookah, any of these things, nicotine, tobacco based, where you're inhaling a chemical into your lungs, unfortunately have significant risk. We are unfortunately, in terms of science and medicine, a little bit behind in terms of being able to tell the public exactly what these risks are going to be in the next 10 or 20 years, though. But you're not out of the woods just, because you vape and don't smoke cigarettes.
You know, we started at the top of the hour with the conversation of African Americans being targeted with the flavored items that they smoke. They're targeting our children. And Dr. Revels, you just mentioned younger ages. So how is the whole concept of flavors fitting into this conversation?
I think in terms of not just menthol, but in addition to the ban on flavoring period, is related to the concern that young people are being targeted. Just going back in history, when you look at the timing that African Americans started being targeted for menthol cigarettes, it was around the same time that the FDA banned tobacco companies from targeting young people. So they realized they needed a new audience. So in the 60s, they effectively started targeting Black patients with their ads because they were losing an entire population. And now with, the concern is with some of these vaping flavors like bubble gum and strawberry, that these are things that are targeting young people, and not just people in their 20s, but teenagers. You hear stories about, vape cartridges being hidden in school notebooks. And I saw a short documentary about a teenager that was addicted, and they're just calculating the amount of nicotine this young person was taking in these vape cartridges was well beyond what they would have been able to smoke in the same time period.
And it's the nicotine that addicts you, because nicotine mimics the neurotransmitters and like dopamine. Sometimes I think people are not really addicted to the nicotine as much as they are the dopamine hit, that feel good neurotransmitter. And so the nicotine will cause the brain to release the dopamine. And once you start smoking, the brain is going to take care of you. So what it does is it will stop producing dopamine because the nicotine is now triggering and mimicking dopamine. So when you stop smoking, it takes the brain, the body, really the physical addiction can be managed in about 2 to 4 weeks. The brain will start, producing dopamine again, the serotonin that allows you to sleep, so sometimes when people quit smoking, they complain of insomnia. And that's why, because those neurotransmitters. It's the psychological that lasts the longest. But because once you begin to believe that when I'm stressed, nicotine, smoking a cigarette will relax me, and it does, because, it'll make your body produce, your brain produce serotonin, which will relax you. But you have a poor coping style for stress. And so again, it's just a whole ball of it's physical, it's psychological, and then it's social. I've had one client, a young boy, I think he's about 25, And he was a chain smoker, smoked all day. But he had a disability that did not allow him to get up and go as he wanted to. He had to get a Medicaid cab, and I think you have to reserve the cab, 24 hours or 48 hours in advance. So he couldn't be, as a young man, he couldn't be spontaneous. And he just said to me, he said, Dr. Beard, these cigarettes are my friends. He said, I'm trapped in this house all day. He said, this is all nobody comes to visit me. He said, and this is all I have to do. And so, it's social. Some people won't give up nicotine because if everybody in your family smokes, especially let's say after Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, go out on the patio and smoke. Well, what are you going to do? And some people are not strong enough to. So when I'm working with people that smoke, I don't even talk about quitting smoking right out the gate. I don't, because I realize they quit every night. Most people quit every night. Very few people wake up just to smoke. They may wake up, go to the bathroom and smoke. So they can quit. They just can't stay quit. So let's deal with those things that's not allowing you to stay quit.
Dr. Beard, can I ask a question unless someone else has one?
Sure. I mean,
one thing that we have seen historically, kind of as you mentioned, a lot of people say, I don't know anybody that smoked. A lot of that is because over time we are seeing in the United States that people are smoking less. But unfortunately, what we have seen is, and historically, African-American women have not smoked as much. But we are, kind of seeing the curve for that group change a bit. And what that also means is while cancer rates are dropping in some groups, they're starting to go up higher, unfortunately, in African-American women and some women in general because of that delay in terms of picking up smoking. Do you have any thoughts about that, or why that you think that might have happened in terms of seeing African-American women pick up smoking?
I do. I've worked with one lady that indicated she smokes because nicotine is an appetite suppressant. When she does not have enough food to feed her kids, she'll smoke a cigarette and let them eat. Now, in her world, that's real. Now, as professionals, we may say, oh, you shouldn't do that or whatever. But in under-resourced homes, single parent, whether it's, a man or a woman, I see that they rely on the nicotine. They use it kind of like a poor man's Valium or whatever to manage the stress of living. And, it could be racial stress, it could be community stress. So I have encountered women who use the nicotine to manage the stress in their life. Now, and just keep in mind that, we live in a stressful country right now. Everything, stress is everywhere. And some people are, I had a young woman who had stopped smoking for 20 years call me and say, Dr. Beard, I'm afraid I'm gonna start smoking again. And I said, tell me what's happening. Stress. She's under a lot of stress. So I don't have a definitive answer, Dr. Rebels, but that's what I've seen with the people that I work. I know with a lot of people say they smoke because they are stressed. So that would be one answer why we may see it,
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, financial stress, school shootings. You've got to send your kids to school. Some kids, I have two granddaughters who are in high school, and it's just different for them. You got to wonder, what's going to happen today, that kind of thing. So it's stress, everywhere. So I
And
hope
you
that
know,
answers your question.
this is Sunday. This Pastor Kitchen, I really wish you could chime in and help us with this stress thing, this stress conversation. But um the we as believers need to get back to a place where Jesus becomes our first act rather than our last. I'm gonna add Pastor Kitchen in here. We do get to Jesus, but we've got to figure out how to move him closer to the top of where we go first, right? Pastor Kitchen, you want to share?
Yeah, I always stress wellness at church, and I try to talk about mind, body, and spirit. And of course, in the church, I'm stressing spirit, developing that prayer life, having a devotional life, and also having fellowship. Because, when you have fellowship with other Christians, you can pray for them, they can pray for you, but you can also share your life experiences. And sometimes the best reliever for stress is just being able to let it out, to have a safe place where you can talk and you feel that you're not going to be judged or criticized, but rather you're going to be encouraged. Now, you might be corrected if your behavior is off, but that is such a wonderful thing. And then to have the opportunity to do stress relieving things with other people. Sometimes people don't even have an idea of what would help them with their stress. Some people it's reading, some people it might be listening to music, other people it might be exercise, some people it might be playing board games, but to be open and willing to explore opportunities to relieve your stress. And then working at life balance. So many people want to work, so I can get, but life isn't all about that. And when you teach people how just to do nothing, to just turn everything off and just be still, which is a wonderful stress reliever, but so hard in a society where 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's something that you can do. And then for women, a lot of times, something that you think you should be doing. But God told us that there ought to be a Sabbath day. There ought to be a day of resting and just sitting with God. And that's the best stress reliever in the world, to know that you're connected with a power that is the strongest power in the universe, that cares about you, that will walk with you and talk with you and help you bear the heavy burdens. And so I think stress, of course, it has lots of problems, whether they be physical or emotional or mental or even financial or even eating, because all of those things can be overused because of stress. And so I think if you have a regular pattern of things that you do in your life to balance, then you're less likely to get overwhelmed because you already have those things in place.
Mhm.
Amen. Thank you very much. And even as the clock is winding up on us of just a little bit, but I'd like Dr. Revels to talk to us a little bit about research projects.
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. So as we talked about, among people who have smoked heavily, unfortunately, there is a risk of developing cancer, but we have effective mechanisms to screen people so that we can start to intervene early. And we know that it's life-saving. And the difficult thing is that people don't know about this. The screening rates in general in California are profoundly low, and then lowest among minority underserved communities. And so I am working to try and identify how we can get people that need to be screened, that will have screening paid for, to those screening exams. The guidelines were actually changed a couple of years ago to assure that African Americans could get to screening. And so I want to make sure that since we have this resource available, we identify what we need as a population. One thing that I can do is just come up in my own head about what I think is the right thing to do. But I think the most effective thing is talking to the end users or the people and effectively identifying what they need to get to screening, to get to smoking cessation. And so we're actually doing a study. It's an anonymous interview. It takes an hour. We're giving out $100 to those people who are qualified and complete the interview. And so basically whoever, if you know someone that smokes heavily, 50 or older, we would be happy to pre-screen you and set you up for an interview. Because I think an important part that's missing are the people who are actually experiencing some of these things, like trying to identify why African American women are smoking more. I can come up in my own head, but you know, Dr. Beard has had the opportunity to work with people specifically in those circumstances in regards to cessation. And so I think it's extremely important that when we come up with interventions as medical professionals, that we actually reach out to the community and have them assist us in creating those interventions. Otherwise, we come up with something that may not work with unintended consequences. So the goal of the project is to start with people who actually smoke in our community to find out what they need, what we should do to make sure that people know about this, and find out if it's a transportation issue, if it's just too many appointments, you know, what we can do to actually help them get to screening every year.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And to everyone who has registered, I will be more than happy to send them the flyers so that they can register. Should someone who lives with a smoker get tested?
So that is an excellent question. We do know that people who are exposed to secondary to smoke are at risk because they're basically inhaling those same chemicals. The difficult thing is on the current guidelines, unfortunately, they took secondhand smoke out of the algorithm. So it's not an automatic yes. What you would have to do is have a conversation with your primary care doctor about it and have them recommend it. And so right now, the guidelines just state patients who are 50 and older who are heavy smokers themselves. So outside of those guidelines, it's an important conversation to have with your primary care doctor to discuss all of your risks to make sure that you can get the screening and get the screening covered by whatever mechanism is appropriate based on your insurance coverage. The important thing also is this screening CT scan, because we want people to get it every year, it's not a regular CT scan. They actually reduce the radiation so that you are not accumulating radiation every year. So it's basically, it's a low dose CT scan that we're using for screening.
And you know, and Dr. Beard indicated third-hand smoking. One of our cancer survivors actually lived in a building where it was coming through the vents, and she was having to go back and forth to the doctor. She actually took the case to court and won. So we ought not take it lightly that, you know, just because of the screenings or the processes, it's important that if you are facing anything, have the conversation with your doctor.
Right.
Because, you know, you might fall into a category where they can just make it happen. But because we don't say anything for years, you know, they give us that long check sheet. Do you have this? Is this in your family? Is that in your family? They gave it to you 20 years ago, when 20 years ago it wasn't in your family, now it is. And nobody's sending that list back around, right? So as your life changes, as you realize things, let's stop sleeping on the changes in our bodies. You know, I know a number of people who have recently started using inhalers. there's more to it. It could be more to it, not required. I mean, not necessarily it is more, but keep a note journal on what's going on with your body and how often do you have to use it, and is anything changing with your lungs and your breathing process? Do you find is you need it then, or did you need it at a different time? Whatever. Write that stuff down so that we can engage our doctors. While the doctors are professionals and they know what they're talking about, the ammunition comes when you begin to speak. If you don't tell them, they won't know.
And a lot of times our people don't go to the doctor as they should. So that's why with the project that we're doing in South LA, we are taking cessation and all those things that involve cessation into the community. So we're working with community-based organizations where African Americans already frequent to do the screenings and do what we call a warm handoff to say a primary care or some type of physician, because sometimes just the word screening is interpreted as danger, or no, I don't want to do that, or they're gonna delve into my personal business and that kind of thing. So we're hoping with the community-based organizations being kind of like a buffer, that we'll see more of our people get screenings and whatnot.
I think it's extremely important to mention, as Pastor Rhonda was saying, it's very important to talk to your doctor about things when they're changing, and understanding and noticing changes in your body. Medicine has changed a significant amount in the last 10 years, the last 5 years, specifically when it comes to respiratory or your lung health. We have new inhalers. We have injections. I have severe asthma personally, and there's a new medication that I'm taking that has basically all of my asthma symptoms are gone. And a lot of that stuff we're not aware of. There are new cancer medications that are working extremely well for lung cancer. A new medication was approved about 1.5 years ago, and 25% of the people who received that medication after they had their lung cancer surgery, all the cancer was dead. And so we have new, very effective treatments in terms of your lung respiratory health. And so we don't have to be fatalistic about, I've smoked, I have lung cancer. If I do, nothing can be done anyway, because we know, we've had a lot of different advances that are extremely effective.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have time for one more question. In the event that you have one, if you'd like to raise your hand or drop it in the chat box. This has been a very stimulating conversation on this No Menthol Sunday. To have both Dr. Karen Beard and Dr. Shoshana Revels here with us. I don't want to rush too fast. Looking for a hand to go up. And if there be none, that I would like to thank each and every one of you for being here with us today. This month of May, make sure I have all my dates straight. Month of May, and this coming Saturday, May 27th, we Celebrate Life is partnering with Dr. Benjamin Island, Pastor Benjamin Island, and Pastor Larry Dozier, and we will be engaging in a mental health conversation. Even from the basics, like what is it? How do I know I have it? Like I have it. Not just they have it, but what about me? Right. So we're going to have that conversation. And we welcome your questions in that conversation as well. So feel free to check your emails, because I will be sending that information out to you as well. And again, I'd like to thank Dr. Karen Beard and Dr. Shoshana Revels for taking some time off on this Sunday to share with us around No Menthol Sunday, which is a national event. We want to make sure this word gets across our nation so that we can have our own loved ones, family and friends, to live longer because of the information that we share. Again, I'm Pastor Rhonda Hulbert, founder of Celebrate Life Cancer Ministry, and we thank you for your time. And we ask that you would simply choose life. Thank you.